Alrighty, let's start with our prayer for study. I'm just going to drag this whole thing over and have my own little personal desk here. Christ, my Lord, the giver of light and wisdom, who opened the eyes of the blind man and transformed the fishermen into wise heralds and teachers of the gospel through the coming of the Holy Spirit, shine also in my mind the light of the grace of the Holy Spirit. Grant me discernment, understanding, and wisdom in learning. Enable me to complete my assignments and to abound in every good work. For to you I give honor and glory. Amen. Most blessed Lord, send the grace of your Holy Spirit on me to strengthen me, that I may learn well the subject I am about to study, and by it become a better person, for your glory, the comfort of my family, and the benefit of your church and our nation. Amen. Okay, let us look at some poems. And this week we get poetry by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Longfellow is the first American poet that we've met, the first American writer that we've met this year. We will have more, but find it. You know, it took a while after we were a country to really have a literature of our own. So we're talking 1830s, 1840s, you know. And Longfellow and Edgar Allan Poe and Melville and some of these writers started writing poetry that was just sort of distinctively American as far as the world was concerned. And next time we meet after Christmas, we will read his most famous one, and I bet you all know it, Paul Revere's Ride, which is I know it's long, but I'm telling you, if you're looking to memorize, like, it's got the rhythm, it's got the beat, it's very easy to memorize, and you will amaze your friends and family with the long poem that you've learned. Today, though, I have a couple of shorter ones from Longfellow. And the first one is just, I feel like both of these maybe, but the first one especially is deceptively simple. I shot an arrow into the air. It fell to earth, I knew not where. For so swiftly it flew, the sight could not follow it in its flight. I breathed a song into the air. It fell to earth, I knew not where. For who has sight so keen and strong that it can follow the flight of song? Long, long afterward in an oak, I found the arrow still unbroke. And the song from beginning to end, I found again in the heart of a friend. What is the same about it, the arrow and the song? How are they the same? What happens to both of them in this poem? Mm-hmm. They both go somewhere, but we don't know where. But they both land somewhere, right? You send them out and they land. But you don't always know where they land immediately, right? If you're lucky, you find the arrow again. Do any of you shoot with bow and arrow? Do you do that? Do you ever lose an arrow? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes you miss the target, whatever, and my kids sometimes shoot out in the backyard, but it's amazing, you know, they slide in under the ground, or you look and look, oh my gosh, you can't find it. You can't find it. So sometimes you send out that arrow and it never comes back, right? You just, and then, you know, what if you're out several days later, several weeks later, and you suddenly find one of your arrows? Like, awesome. I thought that thing was gone, and I got it back. Yay. And he says that's what the song that he sends out. And maybe you guys don't run around singing all the time. I don't know. But I feel like it could be your thoughts, your idea, you know, anything that you send out from you personally, from your own heart or mind. And might you never see it again? Maybe. But sometimes you find those thoughts again. He says he found it in the heart of a friend. It's a very good possible memorizing poem. The second one, the tide rises, the tide falls. The tide rises, the tide falls. The twilight darkens, the curlew calls. Along the sea sands damp and brown, the traveler hastens toward the town. And the tide rises, the tide falls. Darkness settles on roofs and walls, but the sea in darkness calls. The little waves with their soft white hands efface the footprints in the sands. And the tide rises, the tide falls. The morning breaks, the steeds in their stalls stamp and neigh as the hostler calls. The day returns, but never more returns the traveler to the shore. And the tide rises, the tide falls. Do you think this poem has a point other than to describe the tide?
It could be like time, like it's talking about erasing the footprints or whatever, effacing the footprints, like time erasing something.
That's very good to notice that, because what does the tide ever change? Like the tide rises, the tide falls, the tide rises, the tide falls. That keeps going on, doesn't it, as time passes? But are there other things that don't just keep going on indefinitely? Like your footprints on the sand, right? I think it's really kind of odd to me. It strikes me as odd, always when I read this, that the traveler hastens towards the town, but then the traveler never returns to the shore. Like, I'm always suspicious, you know. I always think something bad has happened. Apparently I watched the wrong sorts of TV shows as a child. I always think something bad has happened. There's this very popular song when I was a little girl. It's a story song called Ode to Billy Joe. And it's about somebody who jumped off a bridge and committed suicide. And then and this girl is really upset when she found out. And they're like, oh, we saw you guys up there. You and Billy Joe were throwing something off the Tallahatchie Bridge. Okay. So many, many years after listening to this song for 50 years, whatever, I finally realized that, oh, they broke up and she was throwing the ring, and then he killed himself. But when I was a little girl, don't ask me why, I thought they killed someone and they were throwing a body off the bridge. I never told anyone that's what I thought. Like, I finally told my husband a few years ago. I'm like, I grew up thinking they, murdered somebody and they were throwing a body on the bridge. Like, why would a little kid think that even? That's horrifying. So, I'm like, oh, the traveler doesn't come back. What happened to him in the town? And I think it's just he decided to go somewhere else. I think he's okay. I choose to believe he's okay. But this is true. Time passes, and certain things happen cyclically, right? And that but not everything. Some things are a one-shot deal. So you build the sandcastle, or you have the footprints in the sand, and they're gone, and it just lasts for a brief time. Your travels take you here, and you never retrace your steps, and you go somewhere else. So it's very deceptively simple. But then if you start thinking about it, like, oh, maybe he's really got something to say about the rhythms of our lives. I read this, but I didn't make this up. I heard it somewhere, that God gives us the right amount of balance. We like regularity, but we also like change. We get bored fast. So we get changes because the seasons change. But they change the same way every year over and over again, right? And so we get the regularity, or like the church calendar. Like we get a new, now it's a fast, now it's a feast, now it's a what. But it happens the same every year, and so we get both of them. So we get both of them in this. I also, I do not know if this is just because it's an idea I have in my head, and I do it that way, or it's legitimate. But to me, the tide rises. The rises part sounds rising, and the word falls, that single syllable sounds like falls. The tide rises, the tide falls. it has a sound. Rises, okay, rises. I can't even say it in a falling way. Rises, rises, false. And I think this is of a purpose. Longfellow is quite a good poet. Again, it's deceptively simple sounding. Tide rises, tide falls. You know, but he could have said the tide comes in and the tide goes out. But that wouldn't have the same rises, falls. And then it makes me think about, well, what else in our lives? Like our mood rises, falls. Our fortune, maybe, rises and falls. Anyway, spend some time with Longfellow, because I'm sure you're going to just, like over Christmas break, get your book out and just read tons of poetry. I can hope. I can hope. Okay, we have one last section of Documents of the French Revolution. On pages 92 and 93. Do not worry, I am not going to read all of this to you. But I do want to mention this author. If you loved, the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers and dig politics, like this is your lucky 5 minutes here coming up. Edmund Burke was a member of Parliament in England and quite the speaker and writer. He was very pro-American colonies. So in other words, he would get up in Parliament and say, dudes, you are driving them away. You're driving them to desperation. You need to stop with the taxes already because they're going to blow. And he warned them, this is not how you want to treat the colonists. But they didn't listen, and of course it did blow up. When the French Revolution broke out, there were a lot of people in England who were just like, yay, rah, you go. And they seemed to think it was rather like the English Civil War and Revolution because, 100 years, 150 years previously, the English had chopped off their king's head and changed the government and then didn't like that government and brought the king's son back and everything. And like, yeah, we love people fighting for their rights. And Edmund Burke said, whoa, 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 whoa. Do you really want that coming over here? Do you know what's going on over there? And he said, not only that, but this is nothing like what we did. This is nothing like what England did. And I want to read a few excerpts here, but Edmund Burke is known as the father of political conservatism. So everybody, we talk about liberals and conservatives today, and we kind of don't sometimes even know what that means exactly. Sometimes it just means the people on the other side that you don't like or whatever you call them, the other name. But what does it mean to conserve something? Like, what is conservation? Preserving it, right. So we have conservation movements for for like nature. What did you say, Dominic? To keep it safe, to protect it, to preserve it, to pass it on. And so conservatism technically is preserving what we have, not innovating, not we're going to try it this way and then that didn't work, so we'll try this and this and this. We're always doing something new. No, we keep the deposit and we hand it on. And so Edmund Burke, that's his argument here. And he said, that's what we were doing. That is not what the French are doing. So I just want to look at a couple of things. First of all, look on page 92 with me. Not the italicized introduction, but the very first paragraph where he starts writing. He says, the very idea of the fabrication of a new government is enough to fill us with disgust and horror. Just the very idea that they've said, you know what, we don't like our government, we're knocking it down, and we're going to build a new one. He said, should fill us with disgust and horror. We wished at the period of the English Revolution, and do now wish, to derive all we possess as an inheritance from our forefathers. Upon that body and stock of inheritance we have taken care not to inoculate any scion alien to the nature of the original plants. Like, what in the world did he just said? He said, it means graft, inoculate. He said, our government is like a plant. We don't graft on bits of alien plants to our government. We pass on what we had. All the reformations we have hitherto made have proceeded upon the principle of reverence to antiquity. So he goes on here to say, so we booted out our king. Why? Because he wasn't giving us the rights of Englishmen, the inherited rights. He said, those Americans, they rebelled. Why? They were preserving the rights that had been handed down from Magna Carta. And he said, well, where did Magna Carta come from? Well, look before that to Henry I. He said, these are rights we've always had as Englishmen, and we're simply acting to preserve them. Those crazy French are just blowing it up and deciding they have all sorts of new crazy rights. And he says, this is in the paragraph that starts in the famous law. In the famous law of the 3rd of Charles I, called the Petition of Right, the Parliament says to the king, your subjects have inherited this freedom, claiming their franchises not on abstract principles as the rights of men, but as the rights of Englishmen. So let's put this in terms that make sense to us. Why do people today in America argue that that gay marriage should be fine and like abortion rights should be unlimited? And why do they want that? I mean, I know because it's convenient, but what's their argument that this should be the case? How do they claim that that should be the case?
Like the rights of us. And the rights
We have a right. Don't they? I mean, that is what they say, right? I mean, everybody. Like, we have a right to marry whoever we want. We have a right to our bodies. We have a right, we have right to clean water. Everybody has a right to leisure time. And everybody has a right. Right. Apparently we have lots of rights. And where do they think we get those rights? A lot of times they say that we get them from the Constitution, although the fact that it's not anywhere. You read the Constitution, I didn't see any of those things in there. Where does the Declaration of Independence say we got our rights? Do you guys remember? They are endowed by, with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. So, for example, congratulations, you're all serfs on my estate. Welcome. I'm a benevolent ruler. I've decided to bestow on you the right to grind your wheat at my mill for free. You're welcome. You have to pay me like all the other serfs do on the other estates. Okay, so I've granted you that right. And then I decided to move. I don't like it here anymore. It's too cold in the winter. I'm going to the Bahamas. I don't know. Good luck with that. And then someone else takes over. And so the person who endowed you with that right is gone. Do you think you still have that right? I mean, I'm gone. I gave you the right. Some other owner comes in. Does he have to give you that right? No, he doesn't. And like, it doesn't do any good to say, but Mrs. Ferguson let us do it. I don't care. It's under new management. Mrs. Ferguson's in the Bahamas now. So what happens if we're endowed by our Creator, but then we decide we don't want to serve the Creator? We decide maybe there isn't a Creator. Do we still have the rights? I don't know. It's a hard question. Like people running around, I've got a right to this, I've got a right to that. Yeah. The guys who wrote those documents said you were endowed by your Creator. You want to, have a relationship with that Creator? No, I don't. I just want the rights. Burke says, hey, we didn't run around saying, we have rights because we're human beings. We said, we have rights because we're Englishmen. And our forefathers won those rights from rulers of the past, or they were endowed by the government of our nation, and our government still persists, and so we still get those rights. But nobody, like today, we live in a world, it's all the rights of man, natural rights, human rights. We're all worried about human rights violations, and nobody stops to ask, who gave us rights as human beings? I mean, I'm not saying people shouldn't have like homes and clean water and things like that. But where do we get the right to that? This is the start of that question, because the French were running around saying, you know, it's a human rights issue. But that's what we'd say today. They didn't really use that term, but you know, the Marquis is running down children in the street, and you know, and like no. And the whatever, the Monsignor who has 5 people making his cocoa, like no. And we're starving in the streets. No, we have a right to food. We have a right to water. We have a right to rest and all the other rights because we're human. But who gave them the rights? We don't know. Our forefathers said they were endowed by the Creator. So at the end of page 93, at that little paragraph at the end, kind of partway down, it says, by following those false lights, France has bought undisguised calamities at a higher price than any nation has purchased the most unequivocal blessings. France has paid a high price, says Burke, for something that some of you wacko Englishmen are actually cheering for. Don't cheer. It's awful. This is part of a very much longer book called Reflections on the Revolution in France. If you have a desire to know very, very much more about Burke and the French Revolution, you can borrow this book from me if you want. Okay, so we're just going to rip through the questions, and then we're going to ramble through this, and then I need to talk about what you're going to do over break. Actually, no, never mind. I promised sorry, Wednesday kids, I promised that the paper stuff would be towards the beginning of the video. Not going to be. Okay, so why is Darnay arrested in France?
Because he's like an English immigrant and related to aristocrats.
Okay, yes, he's got a lot of strikes against him. First of all, you ditched, buddy. You're an immigrant. You left your home and your estates, and you turned your back on your homeland, and you have the nerve to come back here. So that's a strike against you. Plus, you're a nobleman, and we hate the nobleman. So, double whammy. All right. Who is the wood sawyer?
Wasn't his name like Samson of like fire guillotine or something?
Samson is the executioner. He's the mender of roads. So let me just review. So, you know, Charles is in prison for a good long time, at first, for over a year. And Dr. Manette tells Lucy, look, there's a window he can sometimes get to. You never know when. So she would go out every day in the hopes that he would be at the window. And there was this guy, a wood sawyer, and he's creepy. You know, so they're standing next to him. He's like, oh, see my little guillotine? Oh, I'm chopping his head off. Oh, and let's do the kid. Oh, look, the whole family. Chop their heads. And it says in parentheses, the wood sawyer, who was once a mender of roads. Where did we first meet the mender of roads? He is the guy who said, Monsieur, I was looking at the man under the carriage. The guy who's stowed away under the carriage and has now slipped away. And then we met him again when he came to Paris to tell the Defarges about Gaspard's execution. And do you remember they took him to see the king and queen? You're like, dude, yeah, you cheer. You make him think it's going to last forever. And they primed him for the revolution. And now we see the product. And he's horrifying. He's like, yeah, kill them all, kill them all. Wow. Who is John Barsad?
Miss Frost's brother?
Miss Pross's brother. That's another Solomon. There's Samson. Samson is the executioner. Solomon is the brother. Yeah, so what's the deal with her brother Solomon? How does she feel about Solomon? What is she always saying about Solomon? Every time she talks about him.
That he kind of needs to like improve himself.
No, when she before we know who he is, she's always about her brother Solomon. She says things like, "Oh, Charles is a good husband to Lucy, but the only other man in the world that could have been worthy of my Lucy is Solomon. Solomon, Solomon, my dear brother Solomon. He's wonderful." What did Solomon do? What? Yes, but what did he do to Miss Pross? I don't know if I'll be able to find it. Mr. Laurie knows. And he's pretty sure Miss Pross knows. At one point, Laurie says, the narrator says, Mr. Laurie's listening to the whole Solomon thing. And he's thinking, yes, dear Miss Pross, we all know your brother absconded with all your money. He stole your half of the inheritance and ran off with it and left you destitute so that you had to take a job as a nanny to Lucy to make a living. But she just refused to see the bad. It's like, oh, but he's just misguided. He'll come around. He's a good boy. Solomon is. Yeah. John Barsad is Miss Pross's brother, is also the key witness at the trial against Charles Darnay in England, is then a spy working for the French government, going into the wine shop and spying on the Defarges and trying to get him to incriminate themselves. And now he's what they call a sheep of the prisons. He's a spy. He goes into the prisons to see if he can get anything out of prisoners. There. Okay. Who is Madame Defarge?
She's the wife of Ernest Defarge, the wine vendor's wife.
Yeah.
The sister of the siblings who suffered at the Marquis's hands.
She's the little sister of the woman raped by the Marquis and his brother, and the boy stabbed to death in the loft. She's the little sister. And now, it's so satisfying. And so now we know. It's like, why is Madame Defarge hate these people so much? I mean, she hates them vehemently. And, Ernest Defarge is like, well, Dr. Manette, I get a soft spot for him, and the poor guy was in the Bastille. And yeah, I know Charles is kind of, like we're in the family and everything, but for crying out loud, it's his son-in-law, and he's, we could cut him some slack. And Madame Defarge is like, no, there will be no slack. Extermination. Somebody asks Madame Defarge, where will it end? Where should we stop? Extermination. Kill them all. So, yes, it all blows up, doesn't it, at the trial? So, Charles gets released, but actually, before we go there, I want to take a look at Dr. Manette when they first get there, because so I'll write. Well, let's just do it this way. Y'all wrote the list of things on the board last week, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do I need to write all those again? Well, you know what? I better for people that are watching on video, just in case they don't. So I'm just going to write real quick, okay? So what we're going to do in our paper is we're going to compare and contrast 3 sets. And you don't have to use one of these, but I had some ideas. And it was Miss Pross and Madame Defarge, which you now know why I put them there, because they have a major showdown. We have Charles Darnay and Sidney Carton, which are the sort of the key ones of the whole book, right? And I put on here Dr. Manette at the beginning of the book versus Dr. Manette at the end of the book. And that's what I want to talk about first here. I put England versus France, just like the people of England, the government of England versus the government of France. The trial in England at the beginning, Charles Darnay's trial, versus the trial, his other trial in France. And we're going to talk about that one too. And also, like characters driven by love versus characters driven by hate. All right, I'll put an outline up here. We'll come back to this, but some of these we're going to talk about more. So if we talk about it and you want to jot down an idea, like I want to do that, then you're armed and ready to do that. But what was Dr. Manette like at the beginning of the book? When we first met him, what was he like?
He was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
He didn't even remember his daughter.
He didn't know who he was. He didn't know where he was. He had lost his mind completely from being in prison for 18 years, right? And so then he's okay, but he's not okay, right? He loses it briefly once, and then he loses it for 9 days after Lucy gets married. But by the time we get to the end of the book, and not the end, but when they arrive in France, you might remember that one night, Mr. Laurie's in Paris because he's working for Tellson's Bank. He's working with people's accounts and money and property and everything. And there's a knock on the door, and suddenly Dr. Manette and Lucy and the little girl come in. It's like, what in the world are you doing here? And do you guys remember what's happening right outside Mr. Laurie's window? If you look out the window, what can you see? It's not good. Let's see if I can find it. Rising and looking out of the window. Okay. Soon afterwards, the bell at the great gate sounded, and he thought, they've come back, and sat listening. But there was no loud eruption into the courtyard, as he'd expected. Oh, that's them coming in. I'm sorry. That's not the place I wanted to read. I'm not going to be able to find it. Oh, I guess they do. Okay, here we go. I'm sorry. Here we go. The grindstone had a double handle, and turning at it madly were two men, whose faces, as their long hair flapped back when the whirlings of the grindstone brought their faces up, were more horrible and cruel than the visages of the wildest savages in their most barbarous disguise. False eyebrows and false mustaches were stuck on them, and their hideous countenances were all bloody and sweaty, and all awry with howling, and all staring and glaring with beastly excitement and want of sleep. They're covered in blood, and they're sharpening axes and knives at a grindstone. This is happening right outside the window. And Dr. Manette comes, and he starts to look out the window, and he says, don't look. Do not look out that window. You do not want to see. My dear, the doctor turned with his hand upon the fastening of the window and said, with a cool, bold smile, my dear friend, I have a charmed life in this city. I have been a Bastille prisoner. There's no patriot in Paris. In Paris? In France, who, knowing me to have been a prisoner in the Bastille, would touch me, except to overwhelm me with embraces or carry me in triumph. My old pain has given me a power that has brought us through the barrier and gained us news of Charles there and brought us here. I knew it would be so. I knew I could help Charles out of all danger. I told Lucy so. And then a few pages later, it says, as Mr. Lorry received these confidences, and as he watched the face of his friend, now 62 years of age, a misgiving arose within him that such dread experiences would revive the old danger. But he had never seen his friend in his present aspect. He had never at all known him in his present character. For the first time, the doctor felt now that his suffering was strength and power. For the first time, he felt that in that sharp fire, he had slowly forged the iron which could break the prison door of his daughter's husband and deliver him. It all tended to a good end, my friend. It was not mere waste and ruin. As my beloved child was helpful in restoring me to myself, I will be helpful now in restoring the dearest part of her to her, herself to her, and by the aid of heaven I will do it. And then down at the bottom of this page it says, the doctor knew that up to that time his imprisonment had been associated in the minds of his daughter and his friend with his personal affliction, deprivation, and weakness. Now that this was changed, and he knew himself to be invested through that old trial with forces to which they both looked for Charles' ultimate safety and deliverance, he became so far exalted by the change that he took the lead and direction and required them, as the weak, to trust him as the strong. When we first met Dr. Manette, his suffering had broken him, right? He was not competent anymore. And what is he like now in France?
He's super strong. He's leading.
And what gives him the power? Why is he able to do what he can do? Why will no one touch him?
Because he was a Bastille prisoner.
Because I suffered. My suffering is now my strength, right? And we say that, do you know what I mean? It's like his strength is made perfect in weakness, and we quote the Bible, but none of us wants to suffer. You see that, or be weak. That's the problem with that. We like the idea, but we don't want to go through the bad thing. But think about the people who most effectively, like counsel people in a bad way. Like counsel people with mental issues or counsel people who are, suicidal or whatever. Isn't it the people who've been there, right, and suffered it? They're the best. They're the best counselors because they know exactly how you feel. And so, this is kind of what I was thinking when I said Dr. Manette at the beginning and at the end. He's gone from, insanity to a tower of strength, that he can pull strings and accomplish what no one else can do. And it's not that he overcame his suffering, it's because it came out of it. It's not an overcoming it, it came out of it. Here's the thing I was thinking about Solomon. Yeah. My English brother Solomon, mourned Miss Pross, casting up her tear-fraught eyes, that had the makings in him of one of the best and greatest men of his native country, an official among foreigners, and such foreigners. And it says, good Miss Pross, as if the estrangement between them had come of any culpability of her, as if Mr. Lorry had not known it for a fact years ago, in the quiet corner of Soho, that this precious brother had spent her money and left her. I wonder what it tells us about Miss Pross, that she only sees the good in her brother. What kind of character does she seem like throughout the book?
She seems like an optimistic character.
She's rather optimistic, but what else? How else would we? She's certainly optimistic about her brother. She's optimistic there at the end. She hopes they'll get away.
Loyal to the people she's attached to.
She's like bulldog level loyal, isn't she? Like, I will rip you to pieces if you hurt any of my dear ones. I'm telling you. She's very, she's tough, too.
Did she shoot Madame Defarge?
The gun went off. They were grappling for the gun, and the gun went off. So did she? No. But she was, and this is a wonderful example. We'll talk about. We'll circle back around to that in a minute. That her level of you over my dead body, basically. You will come in here. You will chase my Lucy. You will have to kill me. You'll have to come through me. But she seems rather stern to me. Mr. Lorry, do you know how Mr. Lorry is always calling himself, I'm a good man of business. It's just business, mind you, business, business. But then he's like on the verge of tears, like, oh, Mr. Lorry, you're such a softie. You love these people. But he's like, oh, courage, courage. This is business, simply business. And then he says to Miss Pross, after Dr. Manette lost his mind after the wedding, and he says, what are we going to do with him? He's like, courage, Miss Pross. This is business. Business. We have to be practical. We have to have a plan. What shall we do? And he takes her into his confidence, as like, we're people of business. We know how to get things done. We're effective. But then, so she seems sort of stern, and then it's like, oh, Solomon, my dear brother Solomon. It just seems like a different side to Miss Pross. Just like when we see Mr. Lorry breaking down in tears and worry. He's like, oh, I'm just a man. I'm just their banker. No, you're not. You're not. And Miss Pross, oh, I'm the guardian here. Yeah, but you have a real soft spot. And so, Gabriel said, optimism. You wouldn't think of it sometimes, but she does have this optimistic streak in her and sees the good. Not in Madame Defarge, though, which is convenient because I'm not sure there's any good in there. All right, before we move on, though, what does Mr. Cruncher's grave robbing, how does it save the day? It turns out to be, I told you, everything in this book is a plot point. It's not just, oh, that's weird. Jerry Cruncher robs graves. Does anybody remember how it comes out to be very important?
Switches places.
No, Jerry Cruncher doesn't. It's important that Sidney Carton looks like Charles Darnay, but Jerry Cruncher's a grave robber. So remember, we have two spies, right? John Barsad and Roger Cly. And Roger Cly, they saw his funeral in London. And that night, that's the night young Jerry went, and he followed his dad to go fishing in the cemetery, dig up Roger Cly. And he was very happy the next day. But we don't know why until the end. And there sits John Barsad and Sidney Carton, who has shown up out of nowhere, just in the nick of time. He's like, "Go, Mr. Barsad. Let's check our hands, the cards we have, each of us in our hands. Let's see what I've got. I've got you are a spy for one side, but you used to be a spy for the other side. And you were once a spy for the English government. And I'm thinking there's some people in France that might be very interested to know that. Might want to do something about it. Oh, and you are in touch with still another spy named Roger Cly." And he's like, "I am not. Roger Cly is dead. And I can show you the death certificate and the burial certificate." Well, Jerry Cruncher is standing right there. And he's like, okay, I might I might do something sometimes that's maybe not so good. But if I were to do it, I will tell you that you buried Roger Cly in that coffin, did you? You buried paving stones in that coffin, and I know it. At this point, Mr. Lorry's like, Jerry, what have you been up to? What do you do in your spare time? It's like, I don't want to talk about it. He's like, I want to know if you're not going to do it anymore. He's like, I promise I won't do it anymore. I won't do it anymore.
Let's go back to interrogation.
Yeah. And it comes to be a major card in Sidney Carton's hand that there's another spy out there that he's working with as well. And the officials would very much like to know about this whole situation. And they would execute John Barsad if Barsad doesn't do exactly what Sidney Carton tells him to do. Now, when they're getting ready, I just think this is so hilarious. Jerry Cruncher and Miss Pross have to work together. They're an odd duo. I really like seeing them together. But they've been in France now for over a year together, and they're working together. And they've got to get ready to leave. They need to get everything ready, and they don't know what's going to happen. They're pretty sure Charles Darnay is going to be dead, but they got to get out of there. And so Miss Pross is very worried. And she says, I'm so distracted with fear and hope for our precious creatures, said Miss Pross, wildly crying, that I am incapable of forming any plan. Are you capable of forming any plan, my dear poor Mr. Cruncher? Respecting a future spare a life, miss, returned Mr. Cruncher. I hope so. Respecting any present use of this here blessed old head of mine? I think not. Would you do me the favor, miss, to take notice of 2 promises and vows, what it is my wishes for to record in this here crisis? Oh, for goodness sake, cried Miss Pross, still wildly crying. Record them at once and get them out of the way like an excellent man. First, said Mr. Cruncher, who was all in a tremble, and who spoke with an ashy and solemn visage. Them poor things well out of this, never no more will I do it, never no more. I'm quite sure, Mr. Cruncher, returned Miss Pross, that you will never do it again, whatever it is, and I beg you not to think it necessary to mention more particularly what it is. I don't want to know. No, miss, returned Jerry, it shall not be named to you. Second, them poor things well out of this, and never no more will I interfere with Mrs. Cruncher's flopping. Never no more. Whatever housekeeping arrangement that may be, said Miss Pross, striving to dry her eyes and compose herself, I have no doubt it is best that Mrs. Cruncher should have it entirely under her own superintendence. Oh, my poor darlings. I go so far as to say, miss, moreover, proceeded Mr. Cruncher, with a most alarming tendency to hold forth, as if from a pulpit, and let my words be took down and took to Mrs. Cruncher through yourself, that what my opinions respectin' floppin' has undergone a change, and that what I only hope with all my heart is Mrs. Cruncher may be a floppin' at the present time. Oh, she's praying right now. Mr. Cruncher is our comic relief somewhat, but even he has an important part to play. Okay. Dr. Manette is able to get Charles Darnay out, and then he turns, that night they come and arrest him again. He's been denounced by 3 citizens, Ernest Defarge, Therese Defarge, and one other. And like, it was Dr. Manette. How did that, what does that mean? How did he denounce him? Where did they find the denouncement? What did they read at the trial?
I don't remember what it was.
Was it something in his cell, maybe?
It was something in his cell.
He wrote it down before he lost his mind. Remember when they broke down the Bastille and Defarge wanted to go to 105 North Tower, and he's like, break open the table, rip open the bed, and he's feeling around in the chimney, and he finds it. He finds the letter that decades ago, Dr. Manette wrote the whole thing down. And he told the story of the woman who'd been assaulted and was laying there dying, the brother who came to save her and was stabbed to death. And I want to read a couple of, let me find, okay, So he writes in this note that he's left behind. This boy is dying. He's bleeding to death of his stab wounds. I raised the boy's head against my knee, writes Dr. Manette. Marquis, said the boy, turned to him with his eyes opened wide and his right hand raised. In the days when all these things are to be answered for, I summon you and yours to the last of your bad race to answer for them. I mark this cross of blood upon you as a sign that I do it. In the days when all these things are to be answered for, I summon your brother, the worst of the bad race, to answer for them separately. I mark this cross of blood upon him as a sign that I do it. Twice he put his hand to the wound in his breast, and with his forefinger drew a cross in the air. He stopped for an instant with the finger yet raised, and as it dropped, he dropped with it, and I laid him down dead. So this is the first denouncement. And then they let him go. He goes home. And one day a woman shows up at Dr. Manette's door. Do you remember who came to see him? The lady was young, engaging, and handsome, but not marked for long life. She was in great agitation. She presented herself to me as the wife of the Marquis Saint Evremond. I connected the title by which the boy had addressed the elder brother with the initial embroidered on the scarf, and had no difficulty in arriving at the conclusion that I had seen that nobleman very lately. He didn't know their name. He just saw an E on a scarf. But now she said, she came to his door and said she had reasons for believing there was a young sister living. And her greatest desire was to help that sister. She was a good, compassionate lady and not happy in her marriage. How could she be? When I handed her down to the door, there was a child, a pretty boy from 2 to 3 years old, in her carriage. Who is it? Who's the child? The little boy in the carriage. Charles Darnay. For his sake, doctor, she said, pointing to him in tears, I would do all I can to make what poor amends I can. He will never prosper in his inheritance otherwise. I have a presentiment that if no other innocent atonement is made for this, it will one day be required of him. It will. She kissed the boy and caressing him said, It is for thine own dear sake. Thou wilt be faithful, little Charles? The child answered her bravely, yes. I kissed her hand and she took him in her arms and went away caressing him. I never saw her more. And then one night, Alexander Manette was kidnapped and taken to the Bastille so that he doesn't talk. And he writes, Now I believe that the mark of the Red Cross is fatal to them and they have no part in his mercies, and them and their descendants to the last of their race. I, Alexander Manette, unhappy prisoner, do this last night of the year 1767, in my unbearable agony, denounce to the times when all these things shall be answered for. I denounce them to heaven and to earth. He has denounced Charles, the Bastille prisoner, and what are you going to do? He's guilty, and the trial is over. That's all we need. Not only can his word save, but it can also condemn, right? And this is the time when all those things will be answered for. So, we have two things going on at the same time, don't we? Sidney Carton has a plan. Alexander, you told us the plan. What is the plan?
Just to switch places.
I'm going to switch places. I look just like him. Does anybody remember what Sidney Carton does the evening before he goes to the prison to change places with him? does several things, but does anything stick out? I tried to find it yesterday and I couldn't find the page that I wanted. Here's the one thing. Hang on. No. Okay. One thing he does is he goes to the Defarge's wine shop. He asks himself, shall I do well in the meantime to show myself? I think so. It is best that these people should know there is such a man as I here. It is a sound precaution, and may be a necessary preparation. But take care, let me think it out. And he thinks for a while, he says, it is best that these people should know there is such a man as I am here. And he turned his face towards Saint Antoine. He gets there, and he goes in, and he overhears what's being said. He hears, English? Asked Madame Defarge, inquisitively raising her dark eyebrows. Yes, madame, I am English. Then he overhears them saying things like, I tell you, a good deal like. He is much in your mind, you see, madame. And then another person says, yes, my faith, and you are looking so much forward to with pleasure to seeing him tomorrow. I tell you, a great deal like. Why does Sidney Carton go to the wine shop? And what are they saying about him?
A great deal. He looks a great deal like Charles Darnay.
I'm telling you, a great deal. It looks a great deal like him. Why does Sidney think it might be a good thing for everyone to know there's a guy who looks a lot like Charles Darnay hanging around?
So Charles Darnay doesn't get incriminated.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Because if everything goes according to plan, there's going to be a carriage going wildly for the barriers and headed for the coast. And it's going to have a guy in it that looks very much like Charles Darnay. As a matter of fact, it's going to be Charles Darnay. But it would be a really, really good thing if they got stopped anywhere. And the Defarges put the note out and say, yeah, it's the guy. You know, he was in the wine shop last night. It's the guy who looks like Charles Darnay. It's all of a purpose. The other thing, I'm so sorry, I can't find it. He walks the streets. And I can't believe I can't find it. He keeps reciting, I am the resurrection and the life. And he who believes in me will not die. He keeps reciting, I am the resurrection and the life. Because he knows it's his last night on earth. And he has time to prepare for that. He has time to prepare. And so here's a question. Who are some of the people who are recalled to life in this book?
Dr. Manette.
Dr. Manette is the first one, isn't it? And that's when we first meet him in book the first, where that's the message, recalled to life. They're going to dig this man. This man's been dug out of prison, basically. And he's been given a life again. He's recalled to life. Where else have people been recalled to life?
Charles Darnay was also recalled to life.
More than once. He was on trial for his life in England. Remember, for his life. And Sidney Carton saved him. And now he's going to be executed the next day. And I mean, it gets so close. Remember there at the end, he's counting off every strike of the clock that he'll never hear again. And he knew the time was 3 in the afternoon. I'm dying at 3. I figured it'll take him a while to get us there, so 2. It would be good to set your mind on 2. And it strikes noon. My last noon. My last noon. That's how close. Before Sidney Carton comes. In a sense, Roger Cly was recalled to life. He never was buried, but they thought he was dead, but he's alive again. But is there someone else who was metaphorically recalled to life? Someone who thought they were dead and wasted?
Sidney Carton.
He said, I'm a what might have been. I'm a has-been, not even a has-been, because you have to have been something to be a has-been, right? He's a never was, instead of a has-been. He's a never was. But no love is greater than a man lay down his life for his friend, right? And he said, for you or any you love, to keep anyone dear to you, I will do anything. And he does. And he goes out in a blaze of glory. Not the people watching. They don't know. Except that little girl, right? The little seamstress, whatever, that he rides. He rides to the guillotine and he holds her hand. She's like, they say I'm in plots. I don't know what plots those would be, but if it's better for the Republic that I die, I guess I can die. And she looks at him, it's like, but you're not him. Are you dying for him? He's like, yeah. Don't tell. Only one person knows. And it matters to none of them, but it matters to the Manette family forever. Let me find the spot I went to. She kisses his lips. He kisses hers. They solemnly bless each other. The spare hand does not tremble as he releases it. Nothing worse than a sweet, bright constancy in the patient face. She goes next before him, is gone. The knitting women count 22. I am the resurrection and the life, saith the Lord. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. The murmuring of many voices, the upturning of many faces, the pressing on of many footsteps in the outskirts of the crowd, so that it swells forward in a mass, like one great heave of water, all flashes away. 23. He's not even the first. He's just number 23. But he saved a family. And he lives in them forever, right? Because we see, I'll finish with that ending that makes me cry, but I won't cry in front of you, I promise. Okay, here's something weird that I noticed. All right? Okay, actually, we get two or three more things to talk about, and then I'm going to talk about our paper, and then I'm going to talk about Frankenstein. Let's go back to the Miss Pross, Madame Defarge shooting that Alexander was talking about. The grappling and the gun went off, and page is that in? Hold on. Okay, I don't want to lose that page. Okay. Hold on. You guys are so patient. Why can I never find what I want? Okay. All right, Madame Defarge. What does she want to do? Why does she go try to visit them again? Why does she go over to the Manette's house that day?
Wasn't that so she could get like Mrs. Manette?
Yeah, I'm taking them all out. That kid is the grandson of the Marquis. He's done. She's done. And wife, close enough. Close enough. She's going out too.
She married him.
Yeah. It describes Madame Defarge like this. There were many women at that time upon whom the time laid a dreadfully disfiguring hand, but there was not one among them more to be dreaded than this ruthless woman, now taking her way along the streets. Of a strong and fearless character, of shrewd sense and readiness, of great determination, of that kind of beauty which not only seems to impart to its possessor firmness and animosity, but to strike into others an instinctive recognition of those qualities. The troubled time would have heaved her up under any circumstances. But, imbued from her childhood with a brooding sense of wrong and an inveterate hatred of a class, opportunity had developed her into a tigress. She was absolutely without pity. If she had ever had the virtue in her, it had quite gone out. No pity. So, she shows up, and she doesn't know they're gone. Only Miss Pross is there. And we have, you know how they talk about the irresistible force meeting the immovable object or something like that? Madame Defarge's dark eyes followed Miss Pross through this rapid movement. Miss Pross is closing all the doors, so she doesn't know whether Lucy's there or not, and rested on her when it was finished. Miss Pross had nothing beautiful about her. Years had not tamed the wildness or softened the grimness of her appearance. But she, too, was a determined woman in her different way, and she measured Madame Defarge with her eyes every inch. "You might, from your appearance, be the wife of Lucifer," said Miss Pross in her breathing. "Nevertheless, you shall not get the better of me. I am an Englishwoman." Madame Defarge looked at her scornfully, but still with something of Miss Pross's own perception, that they two were at bay. She saw a tight, hard, wiry woman before her, as Mr. Lorry had seen in the same figure a woman with a strong hand in the years gone by. She knew full well that Miss Pross was the family's devoted friend. Miss Pross knew full well that Madame Defarge was the family's malevolent enemy. Wonderful antithesis. "If those eyes of yours were bed wenches," returned Miss Pross, "and I was an English four-poster, you shouldn't loose a splinter of me. No, you wicked foreign woman. I am your match." "Woman, imbecile and pig-like," said Madame Defarge, frowning. "I take no answer from you. I demand to see her." "I little thought," said Miss Pross, "that I should ever want to understand your nonsensical language. But I would give all I have, except the clothes I wear, to know whether you suspect the truth or any part of it." She understands nothing, Madame Defarge says. And yeah, it was in vain for Madame Defarge to struggle and strike. Miss Pross, with the vigorous tenacity of love, always so much stronger than hate, clasped her tight and even lifted her from the floor in the struggle that they had. And shot her. Well, the gun went off. She accomplished what she needed to accomplish, so that they could get away. And Madame Defarge never got to see Charles Darnay die for the crimes. She lived her whole life to see that moment. And of course, she wouldn't have been seeing that moment anyway because Sidney Carton was there, but still, she would have thought it. Okay, two interesting things to me. One, what happened to Miss Pross after the shooting? She went deaf because of the sound of the pistol right next to her ear. They get into to the carriage, and she's asking Mr. Cruncher, is there noise? Is there noise in the street? And he says, all the usual noises. I don't hear you, said Miss Pross. What do you say? Is there any noise in the streets now? Asked Miss Pross again presently. Again, Mr. Cruncher nodded his head. I don't hear it. Gone deaf in an hour? Said Mr. Cruncher, ruminating with his mind much disturbed. What's come to her? I feel, said Miss Pross, as if there had been a flash and a crash, and that crash was the last thing I should ever hear in this life. Oh, my good man, there was first a great crash and then a great stillness, and that stillness seems to be fixed and unchangeable, never to be broken any more as long as my life lasts. If she don't hear the roll of those dreadful carts, now very nigh their journey's end, said Mr. Cruncher, glancing over his shoulder, it's my opinion that she never indeed will hear anything else in this world. And indeed, she never did. Here's my question. Everything else in this book is so interwoven, and everything comes back in every plot point, or it's very obvious, like the whole recalled to life, and I am the resurrection and the life. And it's Miss Pross does her duty, she fights off their main enemy, and she goes deaf. And I don't know why. I mean, I'm not thinking of an answer, like, and I'm hoping you'll give me a certain. I'm hoping somebody has an idea, honestly, because I don't know why.
Everything in this book has like
Everything has meaning, and I don't think he just thought, oh, that'll be a fun detail. We'll just make her go deaf. Why? What? I mean, we don't even see. That's the end. And they go back to England, obviously, and we go to Sidney Carton's last moments, and that's it. And I don't know. But I feel like when we read a book and there's a detail and it really sticks in your craw, and you're like, why would he do that? It probably means something. And it isn't random, but I don't know what it is. So I'm just throwing that out. You guys, while you're, I don't know, having your Christmas, you can just ponder Miss Pross's deafness for me. I mean, I just try, it has, it's final. It's, what is there? It's silence, solitude that comes with not being able to hear. I can't work it out. Anyway, seriously, this is just me throwing out to you. If anybody has an epiphany about Miss Pross going deaf, I would love to hear it. Think about that. The second interesting thing is, again, he's not a bad writer. He didn't do an accident here. They're whizzing along in the carriage. Charles Darnay is there. By the way, what did Sidney Carton pick up at the chemist, like the pharmacist? And the guy said, you know you can't put these together. You know what will happen if you put these things together? And he said, yeah, I know. What did he get? And what did he use it for?
Wasn't it like to knock someone unconscious?
He drugged Charles Darnay. He knows he's not going to show up in the prison, and Charles can say, yeah, that's a good plan. You just go ahead and stay here and die for me. They're going to have to drug him. He's like, oh, hurry. We got a plan. Put these shoes on. Take the ribbon out. Spread your hair out like mine. I'm going to tie my hair up like yours. And he's like, write a letter. And of course, he's dictating a letter that he never intends him to write. He's talking to Lucy. He's saying, do you remember a certain conversation that passed between us? I am now ready to fulfill the vow that I... He's like, keep writing. And it's just so he can keep sticking like the chloroform or whatever in front of his face to knock him out so they can drag him out. So they're whizzing on through the night, and they're stopping at all the checkpoints, right? And they're checking everybody's papers. It's like, okay, you, go. Listen to what this, see if you can hear what happens. It might be hard when you're listening. Okay. These are again the words of Jarvis Lorry as he clasps his hands and looks upward. There is terror in the carriage. There is weeping. There is the heavy breathing of the insensible traveler. Are we not going too slowly? Can they not be induced to go faster? asks Lucy, clinging to the old man. It would seem like flight, my darling. I must not urge them too much. It would rouse suspicion. Look back, and see if we are pursued. The road is clear, my dearest. So far we are not pursued. Houses in twos and threes pass by us. Solitary farms, ruinous buildings, dye works, tanneries, and the like, open country, avenues of leafless trees. The hard, uneven pavement is under us. The soft, deep mud is on either side. Sometimes we strike into the skirting mud to avoid the stones that clatter us and shake us. Sometimes we stick in ruts and sloughs there. The agony of our impatience is then so great that in our wild alarm and hurry we are for getting out and running, hiding, doing anything but stopping. It goes on for a while. Leisurely our 4 horses are taken out. All the time our overfraught hearts are beating at a fast rate. Then a new paragraph. At length the new postilions are in their saddles. The old are left behind. We are through the village, up the hill. We are pursued? Then the night comes on dark. He moves more. He is beginning to revive. The wind is rushing after us, but so far we are pursued by nothing else. Does anybody hear, I went on and on, does anybody hear something that happened suddenly? Before that part I read, it was, they hope he will recover in the fresh air. Jarvis Lorry stands with his hands on the coach. And then suddenly, houses pass by us. We are pursued. We are out in the open country. Our overfraught hearts are beating. Pity us, kind heaven, and help us. Look out and see if we are pursued. What happened? What changed? We, our, us. It's suddenly written in first person. Up till then it was, and they brought him out to the carriage, and Mr. Lorry did this, and then suddenly it's, we are whizzing through the night. We are whizzing past the houses. Our hearts are beating fast. Look out to see if we are pursued. We, us, our, suddenly. And it never happens again in this book. And then the next chapter starts and it's all third person again. I don't think he made an accident. I don't think he suddenly forgot he was writing in third person. What is the effect of saying we, us, our?
Makes you feel like more, well, makes it kind of feel faster in a way because you don't have to like focus on a single person.
Yeah, like what's he doing? What's he doing? It sweeps you along with it, doesn't it? You're a part of the action suddenly. It's happening to you. How would you feel if it were happening to you? We leave Sidney Carton. I'm actually not going to read it. You read it. Read it again. The very last page. Said, you know what? Some people, if you had prophetic powers right before your death, if Sidney Carton did, he would prophesy this, and he sees things like Barsad, the Defarges. They're all going to die on this guillotine too. The crowds are going to turn on them eventually, and they're all going to die. And he says, I see her home with a baby that bears my name, a little Sidney Carton Darnay. And he's going to do so well. He's going to follow my path in life. He's going to go into law too, but he'll do it so well. He will wipe all the blot of my name out of it. And I see him grown up a man, winning his way through the world with his little son, with golden hair and a face that I know, coming back to this place and telling him my story. The man who saved my daddy's life here. And he ends with it, it is a far, far better thing I do than I have ever done before. It's a far, far better rest I go to than I have ever And that is the end of Sidney Carton. Sidney Carton, who lays down his life for someone else in a very Christ-like way. So I would like you to work on exploring for me some pairs and just your standard. I'm not going to belabor this because I feel like y'all know this. You might not even have to write this down. You guys know how this works now. Introduction and conclusion, right? You kind of need to tell me the book and the author. You need to tell me sort of what the book's about. Please don't tell me the whole book. Oh, please don't tell me the whole book. It could be a story of a man in danger for his life during the French Revolution and the man who laid down his life in love for it. That's enough. That's enough, right? And the conclusion is to wrap it up. I feel like everybody in here is getting pretty good at your intro and conclusions. And then choose 3 of these and compare them and contrast. How are they alike? In this case, they look alike, for crying out loud. They both love the same woman. How are they different? That's pretty easy too, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Or we could say, how are they connected? Compare, contrast, or what's the connection? Now, I'm going to give you an alternate because I think y'all can handle it. It could be that one of these pairs is really interesting to you, and there's a lot to say. For example, Charles and Sidney are the centerpiece of the entire book. The entire book is about, it's not only a tale of 2 cities, it's a tale of 2 men, isn't it? You could spend all 3 pairs just comparing and contrasting them in 3 different ways. If you just have a lot to say about them, like more than you'd want to say in a paragraph, you could just concentrate on one of these and just unpack it like in 3 different aspects. You could do it that way. You could do a paragraph on Charles, a paragraph on Sidney, and a paragraph comparing. Like we did Brobdingnag and Lilliput. You have options, in other words, and I'm not going to tell you, okay, this paragraph has to be all about this one thing, and that you're in high school. You can take this assignment and you can mold it the way you want, all right? But if you just want to do an easy standard, like there should be so much about each of these that it would not be hard to compare and contrast each of these in one in each paragraph. I would like to see parallelism 1, parallelism 2, and antithesis, but no new thing. And I know it seems a little mean, maybe, but it's not really. We have a week before Christmas Eve. Like you could go home and work on this paper this week. You could have it done before Christmas. You also have almost a week after New Year's to work on it. So even if you don't want to work between Christmas and New Year's at all, you know what I mean? You've got plenty of time. Did I say this all too fast, or does this,
No.
It's pretty obvious, like what I'm looking, okay. I felt like at this point, I really don't need to belabor it. If you start working on it and you're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here, then email me or call me, okay? But I want to talk about Frankenstein. We are reading chapters 1 through 12 of Frankenstein, not a very Christmassy story, I grant you. In your reading guide is a page, and it is called The Year Without a Summer. I would love for you to read that. It is not very long, and it is rather interesting, but I will summarize it also. I will not include all the details, though. An enormous volcano erupted. It wasn't Krakatoa. It was, I know, that's what I always want to say that too. Mount Tambora on the island of Sumbawa in the Dutch East Indies. The most explosive volcanic event in the historical record. I would have said Krakatoa for that, but no. Among the largest eruptions of the last 10,000 years, Mount Tambora's explosion thrust plumes of gas and ash 43 kilometers into the stratosphere. Fallout distributed 1,300 kilometers distant. And it says 90,000 deaths. Highest mortality of any known volcanic event. Okay, so what does this have to do with Frankenstein? Well, You may know that when volcanoes shoot that much garbage into the atmosphere, it affects the weather, significantly affects the weather. And it said it dropped average temperatures between 1815 and 1818, several degrees on average, melted the Arctic ice pack, and started a race of people to the North Pole because the ice, you could get closer by ship because the ice was melting. But the weather was just crummy. And in this summer, after the eruption, Percy Shelley, the poet, whose poems we read, Ozymandias, and Byron, their friend, and Percy Shelley's wife Mary, decided to vacation in Switzerland together. But the weather was just nasty. You know, they couldn't go hiking and stuff because it's like rainy and dark and cold. It's way cold. And so they sat around indoors a lot, and they decided to have a little contest and write a ghost story. See who could write the best story. Mr. Shelley and Mr. Byron reneged on this whole thing and didn't really do much of anything. Mary, on the other hand, got an amazing idea and decided to write a story. And at the age of 19 years old, she wrote Frankenstein that summer. We'll visit more details about where she was when she wrote that later. But I also put in your reading guide these several pages. An account of the late improvements in galvanism. Especially the gentlemen, you so want to read this. I'm telling you, it's disgusting and creepy. It was a thing to run around taking dead body parts and run electricity through them and watch them twitch and move around and stuff. Oh yeah. And so they had been talking about galvanism while they were there in Switzerland. And like Mary Shelley's, I have to write this scary story, or running, bringing dead things back to life. Guys, they did it with human heads. You so want to read those pages. It won't take you long. It's worth it. It's very creepy. It's very worth it. Anyway, that sets the stage for the novel Frankenstein. You know what? Have any of you ever read Frankenstein before? Have you read it already? Okay. Have you ever seen a movie version of Frankenstein? Oh, really? Okay. Do you have an image? If I say Frankenstein, do you have a picture in your head?
Yes.
Okay. It's not the right picture. Like all the movie, since you read the book, have you seen movies too? Okay. Like the monster, you can, okay. I don't think this book is going to be what you expect. It's surprising. It's rather surprising. So read chapters 1 through 12. I do not think you are going to have any trouble following the plot of Frankenstein. Some of you, it was kind of dicey at the beginning of Tale of Two Cities. Shelley is not super flowery, it's pretty obvious what's going on. I don't think you'll have any trouble, and you'll probably whiz through it pretty fast. You could, again, easily, probably this week, just read all chapters 1 through 12 and then be done, till January. And once you get started, once it gets started, you might want to keep reading because you might want to find out what happens. All right, that's it. Any questions? All right, awesome. Have a wonderful Christmas. Let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll see you on January the 7th, I believe.